Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this afternoon I am delighted to be joined by Quinny, sporting a fantastic, unworn, unused Celtic jersey, and also Chris McElwain, who is back in the hot seat. I think behind you, you have a signed Celtic jersey. We will get diving into the Brian McLaren Peter Grant night on Friday, which was phenomenally attended. And a great night was had by all. Some new stories, some old ones. Obviously, Chris, you'll have seen Granty a few times now, so you know you've got to lead them into the funnies. My favourite, I've got to say, my favourite Peter Grant story is Pat Bonner's jacket. Quinny, have you heard this about
No.
Pat's jacket? Oh, right. I'm going to ruin it for anybody who ever sees him live ever again. But Pat Bonner, you know, we've had him on a live, and we're hoping to have him on a live again. I'm not going to tell you who we're marrying him up with, but there's a great live event in the mix involving Pat Bonner for the future. But in any case, it would appear that he was quite argumentative. He could be wound up quite easily by his teammates. And of course, this is seen as a weakness in any workplace or dressing room. And so they always wound him up. It was after Christmas time, and Pat Bonner comes to the stadium wearing I think it was described as an Inspector Gadget jacket, but it wasn't a cool jacket, Quinny, right? But his wife, I think her name was Anne. Am I right?
Anne, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It's interesting because back in those days, everybody knew each other's wives' names and all that. I'm not sure that's the case now, but anyway, Pat Bonner's wife bought him this jacket, Quinny, which means you've got to wear it, right? You've got to wear what your wife buys you, even if you don't like it. So he comes into the training, and everybody's looking at him going, big man's got a new jacket for his Christmas. It was a horror show. So anyway, Roy Aitken tells Peter Grant to go and do something with it. He doesn't know what, just do something with it, right? And so Grant, he sneaks it out the dressing room. They're getting changed in at Celtic Park and gives it to John Hayes, isn't it? John Hayes was the groundsman. Still there. He's been there for decades. And he was like, right, and he hatched a plan. Anyway, the guys go out to warm up outside the tunnel, just beside the dugout, and they're warming up and all the rest of it. And I think they're doing a few sprints and all this kind of thing, Quinny. But in the meantime, Hazy has put Pat Bonner's jacket on the flagpole, and he has gone up to that position, and he's pulling it up the flagpole, which normally is the Irish tricolour. And there's Packy's jacket, and the wind starts blowing, and he says it looks like Pat Bonner's trying to save something in the air. And at that point, Roy Aitken says, right, guys, let's all turn round and sing the Soldiers song. And obviously, in order to sing the Soldiers song, they look at the tricolour, and it's not a tricolour, it's the big man's jacket. And by the way, he was still moaning about it last December when that story was told at Barazat and Design. I don't know if the camaraderie still exists. I'm pretty sure there's a few hijinks goes on behind the scenes. But right now, Quinny, it's down to the serious stuff. It's down to pre-season training and a game on Friday night.
Yeah, it comes thick and fast, doesn't it? Blink your eyes, and before you know it, we're right here on the cusp of it again. It was really kind of jarring seeing everyone back at training the other day. Was it Friday or Thursday or whatever? We got all the kind of training footage and interviews from Kennedy and McGregor and these different bits and bobs. But it's as I say, yeah. But you blink in before you know it, we're back in pre-season. But it's actually been quite a quick summer. You know, we've actually been doing some transfer business. We've actually, you know, had some progress in the squad for the positive over the last couple of weeks. And yeah, as I say, here we are already.
I know it is a very quick turnaround. What are we going to be talking about today? Anything that we've spotted, obviously, with the first training sessions. We're looking ahead to Friday night, and it's a game against Queen's Park. You're going to be very lucky if you see the action, but it's going to be on Celtic TV. Rod Stewart at Glastonbury. Right. Okay. On the fence with this one. Going to have to speak about Rod. John Clark, obviously, the details of his funeral mass have been revealed. And some departures from the football club as well. We're talking about that and potential incomings that are about to happen, and who's going to be having a big season in the coming months. Players who are already at the football club. I want to talk about that a little bit as well. There's a Legends match just been announced. We're playing Manchester United coming up in September. Tommy Rogic and Joe Hart will be coming back to Celtic Park. And there's a few comments made by a certain Mr. Murray. I'm not going to give him his title because you know what? They mean nothing to me. OBEs, NBEs, SIRs, that doesn't mean anything. Right, but a few comments I think that need taken to task. But I'm going to start off with Rod Stewart. Now, Rod Stewart, obviously growing up, I think everybody had that greatest hits, that CD as it was in my house, Chris, and it always got dragged out at Christmas time and a New Year when the family were around, and the greatest hits were pretty great, and it was Celtic United, and he was a Celtic man, and everybody was fine with that, right? I'm a wee bit perturbed by the Rod Stewart thing, right? Okay, so if somebody supports Celtic, Chris, and they've got the Celtic banner on their bass drum, and they've got all their backing singers and dancers all wearing the hoops, fantastic, I'm all for it. But the flip side of that is he's just made comments about Farage, that we should all be giving Farage a little chance. And I'm thinking, this man, I don't know if he's confused. I don't know if he's so out of touch. And by the way, it's a broad church. The Celtic fan base is a broad church. But you tweet out your support for Boris Johnson. And now it's Nigel Farage. And there's other interviews cropping up from previous publications back in the 80s. Beyond all that, beyond his political leanings, Chris, he walked up the Celtic way to the front entrance of Celtic Park, something that we can normally only do if we're going in for a stadium tour. And he gets a bit of verbals from the Celtic supporters who are standing outside waiting, and he flips them the bird. Now, not going to throw anybody under the bus. I was talking to an ex-Celtic player at the weekend who said, regardless of everything else, that was the moment he said, I'm finished with you, Rod. You don't do that to the Celtic supporters. Yep. What's your take on it? Because I'm not buying into it, I'm afraid. Chris, you know, he's a guy who's got a seat for life, turns up, seat for life, and all the rest of it. You've got guys who have played 500 games for Celtic who don't have a seat for life. Doesn't it sit right with me?
You're going to get me shot with my mother, by the way, for talking ill of Rod.
Roderick,
yeah. Look, I think it's difficult, right? Because it's very hard to separate someone's politics from their association with, you know, the football club as a fan, etc. I don't agree with Rod's politics. I'll say that up front. If Rod, you know, has got any form of admiration for Nigel Farage, I think he needs his head examined, quite frankly. But that's my personal opinion, right? And I think, you know, you have to respect that not everybody's going to share your politics, not everybody's going to share your life experiences or your life view, as it were. I've got my opinion on it. What I would say though is, if you're representing the club, I think you've got to embody the values that the club represents, or the values that the club was founded on. I know sometimes we don't feel that necessarily the club represents the values as well as it should, but I think you know, if you are representing Celtic in any way, shape, or form, particularly such a public figure as Rod Stewart is, I think that it's important that you represent the values no matter what you're doing. Now, Rod can have his political views. That's absolutely his right. I would think it would be dreadful if you tell a man who he should support, who he shouldn't support, all that kind of thing. But don't go and shout about it, right? I mean, you're a singer, mate. You're a very good singer. You've had a great career. You're wonderful. You've got a seat for life at Celtic Park. You're getting privileges that none of us could dream about. Just kind of can it in that regard, you know. Just you know, don't go out there and shout about who you're politically associated with. Or if you are going to do that, just don't then suddenly come out on stage with a Celtic shirt and Celtic drum and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't really sit right with me in that regard, particularly as we've seen the support that, you know, that our fans have given to humanitarian causes, to, you know, issues which are let's say not exactly aligned with the right wing where people like Nigel Farage and others sit. So I just think I think we have to separate out the man for the politics. Like, you have no issue Rod going to Celtic Park and you know, enjoying games and being a supporter and all that. And if he talks positively of Celtic, fantastic. But it's difficult to align those outspoken views that he's had with the values of the club. And listen, I don't know Rod Stewart. I've never met the guy. I've not been in his company. I've no idea if he's a good guy, bad guy. I've heard good things about him. I've heard people who can't, you know, dislike him, and you know, you get that in every walk of life. But it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable because you want people who represent the club well, and when you get people as public figures like, you know, Rod Stewart and others, whether they be actors, whether they be singers, whether they be, you know, public figures, whatever, you kind of think they support Celtic not just because it's a decent team on the park, but also because of what the club represents. So yeah, it's a difficult one. People have got different views on it. I think we should let people live their life the way they want. But certainly those views were contrary to what I expected of a Celtic fan.
The thing is with this, Quinny, is yes, you put it out there to a global audience when you rock Glastonbury the way that he did. Obviously, the hoops were out, the bass drum had the Celtic crest on it, and all that stuff. And he's never been shy. He's never been shy to do that, Quinny. But with regards to politics, and again, I've got to say this: there's been Celtic legends who have been Tory voters. That's just a fact of life. When you go to Celtic Park, there are Conservative voters in the fan base, although I think it would be a minority. As Chris was saying earlier, there is a certain, I think, mindset. There's a state of mind. We're not telling anybody who to vote for and all this kind of stuff. But there is definitely, for me, a conflict here. Quinny, on the one hand, you're selling the club and you're doing all that to a global audience. On the other hand, you're talking absolute nonsense about Nigel Farage.
Yeah, I don't know. I think ultimately when I sit on this type of thing, and anyone that watches my stuff will kind of know this. Like, I just don't get into politics and all this kind of stuff, especially when it comes to like the content I make. I'm just not wired for that stuff. I just don't care about it. And I then put that onto your Rod Stewarts and whatever as well. Like, mate, nobody cares about your politics. Nobody cares about anything other than the songs you sing and the dances you make or whatever. I wouldn't agree with Chris that he represents Celtic in any way because he's a fan or whatever. You do want to kind of see that, if people are outwardly holding themselves as a fan, they do resonate with like the club ethics from the supporters and stuff like that. I totally get it, but I don't think anything he says, if he goes and goes, oh, let's all vote for Farage or whatever, I don't think that has any sort of bearing on the perception of Celtic or Celtic fans or anything like that, because he is just like a multi-millionaire celebrity type thing. They're going to say what they're going to say. I think the main problem with it, but is exploitation, because I'm kind of seeing the chat as it's flying away or whatever, and the main kind of word that comes against him here is like fraud, or the one that begins with P. And you only need to look at like that guy Bems got pretty big off of a little bit of Celtic association. You look at that wrestler as well. What was the name? CM Punk. He sort of rivalry with like a Rangers fan. I forget that. I don't follow wrestling, but some other American guy came to Parkhead and put a Celtic trackie on, and the Celtic fans are mad for him now. And Celtic is a very powerful support. And if you are like a public figure, an entertainer, if you associate with Celtic and you get in with the fans, like, you are going to quadruple, you're going to treble record sales, ticket sales, shirt sales, I don't know, depending on what they're doing. So I think it's more just, you say you're Celtic and you say you're this and you say you're that and all the rest of it, but then when your actual behaviour or your whatever doesn't really line up with everything, which isn't, the be all and end all. It's not like it's a totalitarian system over here to be a Celtic fan where you need to believe in one thing or whatever. But I think that's the main thing. A lot of fans, it rubs them up the wrong way. It feels borderline like exploitation. Like, he thinks like, this is a fan base. If I keep in with them, I'm guaranteeing myself like a minimum amount of like kudos, revenue, whatever, and it's these wee things I think that brings that out to the surface, and you get the. But I seen the headline and I quickly forget about these things as soon as I see them, because it's just not for me, Yeah,
this is the thing, when if you're going to buy into it and take the positive with that, as you say, this wave of Celtic opinion, Celtic fans getting behind you, then you're going to have to take the other side of it as well, as far as I'm concerned. Now, we're going to bring up some of the comments. Yes, we are talking football. Alan Robertson is asking about the game on Friday night. We're playing Queen's Park. It is more or less behind closed doors. There's a very limited fan base going to be in there, mainly Queen's Park fans, I believe. But yes, it's on Celtic TV, Alan, so you can tune in there, and that's exactly what most of us will be doing. You go on as well to bring up Inamura. We are going to be talking about him. A great blog was written by our very own Liam Carrigan in relation to his view on the player. He's been watching them over in Japan. Do we think this is another Kobayashi? I hope not. What we've been saying is, when you look at the Japanese imports, and I say that in respect of players who are Japanese, because I know that Nakamura came from Italian football, but our Japanese players, it's been a 50-50 hit rate, really, so far. So who knows, Alan? That's my honest opinion about that. We can all watch the showreels, we can all look at his stats and his data, but who knows how it's going to work out for this player. But it is closing in. It's going to be very, very imminent. Now, the big man, Ewan Boyd, who again turned up at Gracie's on Friday night. It doesn't matter where we are. We could be in Dunoon, We could be in Belfast or in Glasgow. And there's the big fella. Love him or hate him, says Ewan, you can't deny that yesterday Rod Stewart showed Celtic to a global audience. I thought it was fantastic seeing all those Celtic tops on stage. This is part of the argument, absolutely. I remember seeing him on the telly. I think it was New Year, a New Year's performance, and he's on stage with Kylie Minogue. And in the background, there's a big Celtic crest on the bass drum as well. Danny Boy says, Rod Stewart is a total paradox, but you can't deny his love for Celtic. In saying that, his backing for Farage is disgraceful. Ridiculizer, you're in, and you are saying, I think Inamura will be the surprise signing of the season. He really looks quite silky. Delighted with the business so far. Really want to get Sondre Orgessetter. Is that how you pronounce that one, Quinny? Will we run with that?
That's my point.
And as well, right enough. Yeah, he's a player that we've obviously pursued for a long time. Paddy Lavery loved the girls wearing the Celtic tops on stage. Yeah, it absolutely did look good. We've also got, apart from KT, Lubo's.
It was the old kit, but did you see that? It was like last season's kit.
It was, the snakeskin kit. Come on, regurgitating there, Roderick. Are we going to be any stronger than last season? We're going to look through the squad, obviously, and see if we are any stronger. Pegleg Lonergan says, who are you to dictate about the views of a Celtic fan?
Probably directed me there, I think.
No. What I would say to that, Chris, is I don't care about any of that kind of stuff. Don't be flipping the bird to Celtic support, paying Celtic fans. Don't do that. Don't care who you are. Yep. Absolutely bad crack. That's as bad as any of it. That's a lack of respect to the Celtic fan base, of which you claim to be part of. And John Doe, the sailor, he's only making plans for Nigel. I get that. My old man used to sing that song, John Doe. Right, we've been talking about Rod Stewart. Let us know in the comments section. Yes, it's Celtic related, therefore it's football related. I want to talk, obviously, about the biggest story of last week. It was the Lisbon Lion, the passing of John Clark. And the funeral arrangements have been announced by the club. Chris, very interestingly, if you've ever been down to St Mary's, you know that as stunning and beautiful and historic as it is, there is a lack of space down there. So obviously the club have been sharing the details. The funeral mass is at 12 noon on the 4th of July. And also there is a funeral cortege travelling from the Celtic Way at 1:15. And I'm sure, Chris, that will be absolutely mobbed up at Celtic Park that day.
Yeah, I think it's testament to how fondly people remember and look upon John Clark, not just officials at the club, ex-players, ex-pros, fans, people we've spoken to over the past 3 or 4 days. I think it's just the type of character that John Clark was, just a very understated character. He never really put himself at the forefront of anything. A man who was a top player, a Lisbon Lion, a coach. He's been associated with the club for 50 years, longer than some of us have been alive. And yet, he was a man who was just so unbelievably humble, to the extent where, one of our greatest ever players, Henrik Larsson, couldn't believe that the man he was handing his kit to was a Lisbon Lion. And, that humility and that humble nature of the man, I think that really resonates with us as fans. Someone who, doesn't see himself as better than anyone else, just has that shared love of the club. And we spoke to Peter Grant and Brian McClare, both who spoke incredibly fondly about John Clark. We've seen people sharing stories on here and through the socials about John. I was never fortunate enough to meet John in person, but I feel as though I know so much about him just because you're brought up on legends of these guys and the players. And I was always told, my dad, he said, Kitman there, that Kitman, he played alongside Billy McNeil and he was a Lisbon Lion. And you grow up thinking, wow, that's incredible. So I hope anyone who is fortunate enough to go to the funeral, I'm sure they'll pay their respects in the greatest manner possible. Celtic Park, I'm sure, will be filled. And you know what? It could not be more deserved, because John Clark will leave an incredible legacy. He'll be remembered as a true great. We talk about the word legend being overused. It absolutely applies to that man, and may he rest in peace.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And Quinny, it's one of the ones last week. It brings up this conversation every single time that we are saddened by the passing of one of these legends, and it's all about how we remember them and statues being erected up at Celtic Park and all of these things. And I think absolutely do it. And whenever you're up there at Celtic Park, you know, you can walk up the Celtic Way, start off with Big Billy down the bottom of the European Cup, facing towards Ibrox, just as a constant reminder that we won it and they never will. And then walk up that Celtic Way and see them both left and right. I think that would be a stunning display. We've got to do it, don't we? We really do have to do that. I mean, it's a couple of years now to the 60th anniversary. It doesn't seem that long ago that it was the 50th anniversary, Quinny. And I think we need to put plans in place for these guys to be immortalised in bronze. Oh, you've gone quiet, mate. Sorry, you've gone mute.
Sorry, I put myself on mute for a sneeze there. Sorry. I've heard you guys talk about the statue stuff quite a lot because some of the guys have got it in like their hometowns and whatever. And I think this kind of dovetails in with the chat that comes up on the channel quite a lot about the main stand renovation. And I'm kind of of the opinion. I said that last week. I'm sure when I was on. I'm not sure the board have got a long enough lens for main stand renovation. But what I think they could quite easily factor in is that footprint, really redeveloping that, because again, Paul John, you're really good at highlighting the economic deficiencies on the footprint that we've got right now about how much match day revenue the club just hemorrhages. And if they did make that footprint a bit bigger and nicer, popping some statues along the way, some kind of, landmarks. So, for meeting people or for putting stuff at different places or whatever, I could see that happening quite easily, quite well. And just kind of thinking about it, like you could have like almost like Celtic Land would be the kind of vibe, it's almost like you get to the stadium and there's like, the stadium's the kind of the main attraction, as it were, in the middle, but there's all sorts of other stuff going on in and around the place. So yeah, like absolute legends of the club, absolute legends of football, period. Like the Lisbon Lions are in every kind of, don't want to say pub quiz, but every one of those kind of, niche fact kind of things around football. The only team to do this, that, and the other thing, win every trophy, not lose a game, win the European Cup with local homegrown players. So yeah, it's not just our history; it's football history. These guys,
without a doubt, Quinny. And when you go, and I'm not a big fan of English football these days. I've told my story on here many, many times. Used to love it back in the days, through the pages of the shoot and the match and all that, and the Panini stickers. Of course, we knew all the names, and falling out of love with it, a wee bit like Jim Orr. He's got that quote that he loves football, he hates what it's become. But I'll tell you something, you go down there, they know how to celebrate their football clubs. When you walk around the footprint of their stadiums, Quinny, it's actually an eye-opener. And you look at these clubs, you think they've got nothing like the illustrious history that we do, but I don't think that we celebrate it as well as we should. So that's where I'm coming from. And really, in the great scheme of things, in terms of cost, it's a drop in the ocean. It's a drop in the ocean. And it does attract... the tourist fan who comes to Celtic Park, every single where you look, you want to see Celtic history, and you want to make sure that they come back. I know that the tour is very good. It was number 1 last year, I think, in European football. Correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of a stadium tour, but you can make it better. You can just, you can increase it. And from the club's perspective, you can exit through the gift shop, can't you? Because it always makes more money for the club, these experiences. Daniel Farrelly, in you come. Danielle, always great to see you.
Danielle's well established here. I'm surprised you got that wrong. She's
I'll tell you, if it was wrong, Chris, it's due to the fact that in my advanced ages, I don't have the best eyesight, and until you come up on the screen, I've not got a clue who's coming up until they're on the screen, which actually should remove anybody's belief that there's some kind of bias or favourites. I don't have any favourites. Come on now. Daniel Farrelly, how can Celtic fans support Farage, a man who targets immigrants, the very people the club was founded for? And that is a point. I mean, this is what I said. I think he's a confused old guy. I don't know if he's got his finger on the pulse. People are in a bubble. He's not part of the working classes, Chris. He's in a bubble, and you're saying things like that, and you're thinking to yourself, you are completely out of touch.
I think this is the point. I can see, there's a few people, up in arms over, first of all, somebody thinks I don't like Rod Stewart. I actually like Rod Stewart. I like his music. Always have. So, but this is what I'm saying. I think you have to separate the different elements to a person, right? We have no right to tell people who they should support, who they shouldn't, what their political affiliations is. But the fact is, a lot of us keep that to ourselves, right? And we focus on our support for the football club. Rod Stewart, I think, when he promotes Celtic, as some people have said, it's great. It's nice to see. It's good exposure for the club. But we also get a lot of exposure for the club through our political leanings, the foundations that the club are built on, things like that. We are, as a support by and large, I think, largely anti-racist, we're anti-oppression, we're anti-bigotry. We represent some really good values. And we represent those values because that's largely the makeup of the supporters. Not everyone, right? And no one has to conform to a profile or a set standard or a set of parameters to be a supporter. But I like the fact that my club, the club I've grown up supporting, represents those values that I was also brought up with. To not be biased towards anyone because of skin color, gender, anything, religion, anything like that. The whole mantra of the club open to all, it means that anyone can come and support us, but we will stand up against those causes that may be contrary to your own beliefs. And I think that's it. And so when you see such a prominent supporter as Rod Stewart, and by the way, Rod Stewart, for all his millionaire and all his achievements and all that, he's no more valuable than the ordinary man or woman who's been going to Celtic Park for 50, 60 years and paying the money every season, like money every week, or those who can't afford to go to the games but continually support the club. No supporter is more valuable than another. So I don't necessarily like the red carpet treatment some of these guys get. I'll say that for a start. But as a public figure, I think you have to be very, very careful about what you say in association with your other supporters. So it must be difficult, right? And like I say, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer on it. My point was just that I view the Celtic supporters as the best in the world, and it's largely because of the values we embody. And I think when you see a prominent supporter going contrary to those values, it doesn't really sit right with me. But that's my personal opinion, nothing else.
Yep, absolutely. It is. And everybody has an opinion. So let us know in the comment section what your opinion is. Peg Leg. I'm not sure how long you've been viewing Acsom, but we are both a football and political podcast and have been since day one, because football and politics are intrinsically linked, as is the history of Celtic Football Club. So yes, whenever it...
there's a lot of music chat here as well.
A lot of music chat, films,
absolutely,
and anything else that Celtic fans might be interested in.
Just wait till we go on to hair products.
We don't tend to, because apparently I use the Superdrug 99p toxic gel. Remember the light, the green one? You know what I'm talking about.
Still use that.
Whole tub. Get the whole tub in. The slabbering cabbage. Did Quinny just say Celtic lang? I think he did. And I hope he did. I hope he did, right? Because I'm thinking like Willy Wonka style, and instead of purple, it's green. Top hats,
Yeah.
The glittery jacket still works.
I'd go for that.
Absolutely. Davey, 22 quid for Murray's new book. That's a bit steep. You could have bought the Old Rangers 22 times for that. Listen, one thing, going back to the previous point, one thing we don't do is we don't label Rangers chat on here. But if it involves Celtic and there's a linkage to Celtic, then we will cover some of that. And there's something very interesting I felt about some of the snippets that I've seen over the weekend. I just want to throw it out there and see what you think. But we'll get to that. Matthew Anderson has left the building, Quinny. And he was a guy that just 2 weeks ago, I think, we were talking about what's his position at this football club. Is he a guy that's on the fringes that might start, getting introduced to the first team squad? He was part of that process of getting sent out to Admira Wacker, got 44 senior games under his belt. And you look at what's the pathway? Well, the pathway for this kid is like many of his teammates before him. It's out the exit door. And that's not great for Celtic. It looks like a decent move for him, moving into the second tier of Belgian football. Kortrijk, is that how you pronounce it?
Kortrijk.
There you go. Kortrijk. They have just been relegated. He's getting a move over there, undisclosed fee. He needs first team football. It was clear he wasn't going to be getting that this season at Celtic. Good move for the kid. But in terms of the pathway manager, good timing to bring in somebody new, because we need to look at that, don't we?
Big time, yeah. We kind of, I was quietly optimistic Matthew Anderson might be the backup, or might get a bit of an audition to be the backup left back this year, because, like you say, some very good miles on the clock there in a pretty good system. And I'm a big fan. I know we've been chatting a lot over this season about your McCardos, Bonners, and Turleys and whatever. But Ben Summers is still someone that is very much high on my list of let's see where this guy pans out over the next year or two. And because they were the two that went on loan, I thought maybe there's a internal kind of, let's take extra care with these guys. Let's make sure we give them the extra mile to develop as further as much as they possibly can. I'm kind of led to believe from the things I've read and listened to that he was, basically just wanting to play guaranteed. He'd been playing, for the last couple of seasons, fair enough, at Austria second tier or whatever. He didn't want to go and do the squad thing, fight for his place. He wanted to go and keep, being in the deep end or whatever. And with him coming into the last 12 months of his contract, it's probably better that we get him moved out in this window, get a sell-on clause attached to it. Hopefully a buyback fee would be nice, if you could just send him out there, and if he does all right, you can just swoop him back in. But yeah, it's weird because and it maybe links us into the other chat, but with Inamura looking to be inbound, we've now got Inamura, Trusty and Scales, 3 left-sided centre-backs, and Brendan's on record last season is saying he views Scales as left-back utility in the squad as well. So it's a weird one. Mitchell Frame's not even in the conversation here as Adam Montgomery, really. So but when I seen that move happen, I thought that's weird. I didn't expect to see that. I thought he might have been part of the pre-season brigade.
It's interesting that point you make there, because you've said this before about clubs that kind of have that buyback. We don't really hear that very often when it comes to Celtic. A young guy that you're thinking, right, obviously he needs games. I always go back to this trajectory. I was talking to an ex-player who says it's like being on a steep hill, putting on the handbrake and then trying to get the bite to get the car going again. You just want to keep moving. And if you stop and put that handbrake on, it's hard to get going again, Quinny. And I think Anderson's probably been in that point in his career. He's played loads of games, at a level which is higher than the Lowland League in Scotland, and he wants to continue to play games. Good luck to him. I hope he does really, really well. But that buyback thing doesn't seem to be part of our makeup. And maybe, it's one of the things that you could let a whole swathe of players go out in the summer, and you would have that almost security that if they do all right, we'll just bring them back in, and you've maybe already got that as part of the agreement. I like that idea. Scott Bain's
especially
already
for the homegrowns.
Oh, definitely. Yes. They go out there, they play 40, 50 games in the Belgian second division, and they show some real potential. And you think, right, back in you come. Brilliant. I like the idea. A step up from a loan, really. Scott Bain's away, Joey Dawson's away, and now Matthew Anderson. Greg Taylor will be away. His move has not been announced yet, but it looks as though obviously it will be announced very, very soon, Chris. We need more people out the building though, don't we? We need to keep trimming the squad. I mean, you're talking there about left-sided central defenders. We've got central defenders that are surplus to requirements. Yeah. Stephen Welsh, Lagerbielk, and Mike Nawrocki, to name but 3. Listen, we could probably have a discussion about keeping Nawrocki, and there are going to be people in the comment section who probably would. But it's pretty clear Brendan Rodgers doesn't fancy him, and he's going to go with Murray. We need to continue with this, don't we, and move the players that are non-contributors out the door.
We do, and not just because it gets them off the wage bill or anything like that, but for the players' own benefit as well. Their careers are stagnating if they're not able to contribute or break into the manager's plans. And I think the manager needs players there that, for his tactics, for his system, for the way he wants to play and what he wants to achieve on the park. He needs players there that he can rely upon. And sometimes, as we've said, you can bring a player in who's clearly got talent, has clearly got something, but just doesn't necessarily fit that shape that the manager wants, and therefore, it could be a thankless task trying to find a way to fit them in. I think we've seen in fits and starts player like Nawrocki coming in and doing a decent job, but clearly he doesn't have the long-term trust of the manager, and therefore you're thinking, for the player's own benefit, and also to allow us to maybe bring in, a player more aligned to the manager's thinking, then, give them the opportunity to move out. The difficulty you've got is getting someone who will get close to paying the valuation that you ultimately paid for them. So it's, I appreciate it's a challenging process, and it probably is something that takes time. Where I think some frustration comes in for fans like me is, our club is in such a strong and healthy financial position that we shouldn't have to depend on the outgoings to get those quality incomings. So I would like to see, as much I'm keen to see players move out, I don't want to wait till that happens before we start to see some of the big players come in. We saw Ben Negren coming in, looks a good player, the kind of profile of player we want to bring in. Really pleased with that. Inamura, Yamada, the young boy Osman, might be good players. I'd be lying if I said they were the profile. And this is no disrespect to the players until we see them, but they don't have the profile of player that I'm hoping we're going to bring in, because I'm looking for more players of the profile of Arnie Engels or around that kind of, outlay, anywhere between 5 and 10 million, because we need to build quality on top of the quality we've had if we're going to progress, particularly in Europe in this next season.
Let's be honest, Chris, we're waiting to make a big sale before we do that, aren't we?
But we don't. But we don't have to. I think that's the frustration. I could understand in previous years, you send a player out for big money, 20+ million, and you're thinking we can invest that. But we didn't make a loss last year with the outgoings that we had and the players we brought in, and we still managed to bring in quality. Why can that not be the model going forward?
It's been the same. It's been rinse and repeat for a number of seasons, though, isn't it? You look at the players that have left the building. We always, like Quinny looked at this the other week there, we always come out the transfer window and you can make a profit. You can break even. And I have been banging this drum about not waiting until you sell a massive asset before you go out there and invest. But with every passing week, with every passing Inamura, which for me screams project, it doesn't scream to me that this player, and listen, people might think this is harsh, he's not the type of player that you think, right, you're bringing him in and he's going to get a game. Week in, week out, start 11. He's not that starter. Kieran Tierney, starter. You know what I mean? You bring him in, he's going to start, he's going to improve that start 11. We're talking about bringing 3 or 4 of them every summer. And I know that people will disagree that they had the impact that you would expect for the money we paid, but Trusty was brought in as a starter, as was Engels, as was Adamida. You don't pay 10 million quid on a player for him to languish, kicking his heels on the bench. You bring him in to start games. So the players that we brought in so far, other than Kieran Tierney, are in that kind of category. I think we've done some really good business with. Did you notice he called him Ben Negren there, Quinny?
I did.
You started that.
I'm going to get into trouble with my Swedish friend, because apparently that's not the pronunciation. But Quinny's right. It just sounds better,
Yeah, rolls off the tongue, Chris.
It does.
Are you giving us the correct pronunciation then from your Swedish friend?
The correct pronunciation, I believe, is Nygren. That's what I've been told. I have no idea if that's correct, but this come from a Swedish person, so I would assume that's right. So Nygren, but just the Ben Nygren just doesn't sound quite right.
Nygren, kneecap. Why we like a bit of that.
You never know. You never know. At the end of the day, listen, he can be called whatever he wants as long as he hits the ground running, starts banging in the goals and giving assists, and call him Snoop Dogg if he wants. I'm sure
I've seen a picture of him with that new third kit on, Quinny. Was that part of the unveiling? He was wearing it, wasn't he? Yeah. We've already had our chat around that as well. But yeah, this is my frustration, Chris, and I think a lot of people, judging by the socials on Celtic State of Mind socials, a lot of people are thinking, well, we seem to be holding back a bit until the money comes in. But we don't need, as you say, we don't need that money to come in. What do you make of this in the comments? Let's bring in some of your comments. Jerry Smith. Every time somebody mentions Alanis Morissette in the comments, we will bring it up because there is an incredible link to Celtic. Alanis Morissette was taught English by Celtic historian and author, the dearly departed Tom Campbell. Tom Campbell was her English teacher over in Canada. There you go. Tony C is in, if I can find you. Here we go. Ali McCoist seems a bit scared on TalkSport that Calvert-Lewin could come to Celtic on a free. I'm going to throw this one over to you, Quinny, because I know that you do monitor a lot of other markets out there, not just involved in Celtic. I noticed that he had been freed. He's a free agent. He announced it on his Instagram, I believe. And instantly, Celtic are going to be linked to him. Is this just paper talk or radio talk?
I think it would be. Free is Celtic's favourite price. I think we know that already. So I wouldn't rule it out altogether, And, I wanted to come in on this kind of chat with the project stuff you were mentioning as well, so it kind of does tie in the same way. But I feel that there's been a bit of a change at the club coming into this transfer window. Like we were chatting over the last few weeks about, the Frimpong money's sitting there, this money's sitting there from January, it should just be sitting there on ice. And it feels like Rodgers has been given like an abstract number, 8 million quid or whatever, and he's been probably told, sign whoever you want between now and the Champions League qualifier. You need to get this team qualified. And I think like the kind of profile Chris is after, I think all of that is just sitting on Lou waiting for the qualifier to kind of happen. So this is kind of the qualification budget, as it were, which makes Inamura purchase even weirder, because if that is like in this situation here, then like he is clearly a project player, and that's not a disparaging thing. Like, you can't buy everyone ready-made, and ideally, like, the club likes to make profit, and if you're going to do that, you can't be spending 9 million on Ida. You need to find Ida when he's 3 million or cheaper, kind of thing. But in the last couple of seasons, we've not had the qualifiers, and it's just been typical Celtic, wait until the last minute, wait for dominoes to fall elsewhere, etc. So it's been quite refreshing, and we kind of spoke about it in the intro, how, you know, fast forward for this window, Osmond looks to be in, Duhan, as we mentioned, Negren, and Amura probably not too long after, and it's still not even the 1st of July, so it's a nice kind of little move along that way. When it comes to Calvert-Lewin, like, the first interest I seen in him was West Ham. If anyone in the Premier League is interested in him, he's not going to come here. Like, he's a high earner. He's an English, like, homegrown kind of player as well, which, if you watch how English transfer businesses went over the last 2 or 3 windows, like, guys that are homegrowns, maybe not Calvert-Lewin in this case because he's a free agent, but they get an extra wad of money attached to their value, and it's just all horse trading to make sure that they don't break their balance sheets or whatever. So he's the sort of guy, Calvert-Lewin. He's made some headlines over the years for, I don't know if he's ever caught this, but he likes to do fashion shows and stuff like that, and some of the fashion shows he's involved in are pretty eyebrow raising, to say the least. You know, the get up he wears and whatever. So he's definitely a bit more of a free thinker, as it were. He's not necessarily, like, if he told me he wanted to come to Celtic and he was going to take a Celtic wage to do it, it wouldn't be a big surprise to me in that sense, because he does come across as a bit of an individual rather than just that kind of cookie cutter professional footballer kind of personality. But I just don't think the wages he's on now will be coming anywhere close to it, and I think there'll be enough teams in the Premier League that will enter that conversation with him, to be honest. So
yeah,
I don't see it.
If he's into fashion, one look at that third kit, Chris, and there's no way
there's
no way he's coming to Celtic.
If you see his fashion, maybe he likes that, you know, because
is it like, a bit wacky? Is that right?
Yeah, it's like trash bags and tinfoil hats and stupid. You know, maybe I'm exaggerating there, wrong choice of words, but like, it's stupid fashion, if you know what I mean. It's not like cool gear; it's like weird gear, and like, I've got a picture in my image of him wearing like a sarong or like a dress or something like that. I can't remember, but made a lot of headlines a year or two ago because I think he was injured or something, but he went away and was on the catwalk and looked like, in my opinion, a muppet. So maybe he likes our new kit. Maybe that's what's drawn him here. Maybe the new kit is
maybe. Maybe that's
that's why we've done it, to get these guys. This is
yeah. The fashionistas.
That makes sense.
It's genius, Chris. It's genius. We actually said, and let me know in the comment section, but Quinny's sporting the that was the Origins kit, wasn't it? A couple of years ago. That's what we built that one is. Is that right? The Origins kit.
I've just got it in my head as St. Patrick's Day. So I think it's Irish origins
around that
maybe,
time. Yeah. And you're looking at that jersey, and I know I'm more of I've got to admit this, but you know, off the bat, I'm more of a traditionalist when it comes to football jerseys. I do like, you know, that type, beautiful colour schemes and everything else. But that's a million times better than that third kit we've just launched. And we never wore it, Quinny. We never wore that jersey in a competitive game. It was never registered as a jersey. It's a leisure top. James Kerwin, you're in. Oh, still talking about Rod Stewart rocking Glastonbury and selling Celtic to the audience. Hail, hail. What a performance. And the supporter of this great club. Just didn't give us the finger. That's all I'm saying. Jungle Lion, Celtic need 3 to 4 first-team starters. I agree with that, and it's an interesting thing, Quinny, and this is what I like about these shows. You can get people commenting in the comment section that they make points that you look at and you think, all right, I never really considered it in that way. And you've given us it with an angle, and we'll never know behind the scenes as if this is the case. It's almost like we've got a transfer window, but there's 2 phases of it. So you're putting bodies in there up until that point, and the board and Brendan are building something that they think is good enough to get through the qualifier. And then, you know, these guys that you think are maybe the first team starters that Jungle Lion are going on about, maybe 2 or 3 of them, obviously the deals are not going to get done until such times as we know that we're going to be playing in the league phase, Chris. Listen, see, as fans, you don't want to hear it, but I can understand it.
There's a nervousness, right? And I actually, as a strategy, that's not a bad one, right? But there's such a nervousness that we don't do enough to get through this qualifier. You know, I think when you look at our team at this precise moment in time, I think, you know, injuries aside, and, you know, not taking injuries into account of Jota and Hatate, but I think overall as a squad we are stronger than we were when we finished the season. You know, brought in KT, we've brought in Negren, we're, you know, going to bring in a couple of extra players. We don't know how well they'll do when they come in, but you're hoping that through the scouting process and the manager that actually they're of a requisite quality to come in and really improve the overall squad quality, right? So that for me is pretty decent at this stage. I don't want to be negative about it, but there's so much riding on this qualifier. You almost want to throw caution at the wind and actually just go out and spend your money now to give yourself that absolute best chance of getting through that qualifier and into the group stage, because of what we saw last year. You know, we didn't look at a place in that tournament. We didn't just make up the numbers. We went in there and made a real impact. We had Gary Lineker and Alan Shearer praising us to the hill. You know, we put a footprint on European football again last year. And I'll stand by that statement. Compared to what we'd seen in previous years, that was great. That was taking us back to the days of Lenny qualifying and Strachan qualifying. You know, it was great. There was a feel-good element about our European campaign, and we want to get that again. But because we've got this hurdle of the qualifier, you just hope that we've got enough about us to get past that, and then maybe it enables the board to pull the trigger and say, right, great, we've got a European campaign to look forward to, guaranteed games, good chance to go and make an impact, progress again from last year, and we get these players in. But as a supporter, it's tough. It's a tough one to take, because I'll be like, if we've got targets in mind that we can conceivably get before then, I'd be like, get them in. You know, just get them in.
Without a doubt. And you mentioned Jota there. It was great to see him in the photographs of the training session. Yeah, absolutely brilliant to see him. BMAC, I guess we'll never know, but you kind of hope that the question for our audio listeners is Inamura, Brendan Rodgers signing. You hope we're at a stage now when you think, well, what is it since he's come back? This is his 5th transfer window since he came back. You would hope that the teething problems of that initial transfer window are gone. And what he said at the time, you know, I rubber stamp every signing. You would hope that is the case now. I'm not so sure he did. There was a few of those moves that were way down the line before, obviously, Brendan came into the equation. So we've also got Kevin Hampsey. See, I didn't know, I couldn't read the Hampsey there, Chris, until it came up on the big screen. That's how bad my eyesight is. Kevin Hampsey. Get a statue of Rod outside Celtic Park, like Fulham and Michael Jackson. Who remembers that? I thought that was a figment of my mind.
Yeah,
Fulham.
No,
did they have a statue of Michael Jackson?
They did. Yeah.
That is bonkers. He was mates with Uri Geller, wasn't he?
That's right.
And I remember 2000, right? I'm down at a music festival at Reading, and the second from top of the bill were Primal Scream, a band I have loved for years and years. Got into them around about the time of Screamadelica. I know that there'll be people out there who were into them in the early days when Bobby Gillespie was the drummer of the Jesus and Mary Chain. They probably knew about Primal Scream. I didn't until the big album. And anyway, I seen them in 2000, and Manny was playing bass. It was probably the best live lineup of Primal Scream around about the 2000 Exterminator album. And he went up to the mic and he dedicated a song to Uri Geller. We were in Reading, right? And he dedicated a song to Uri Geller, who apparently was a Reading fan, not a Fulham fan. He was a Reading fan. And Bobby Gillespie looked at him as if to say, why are you doing that? But I got the joke, Manny. And Manny is now going to be joining Acsom for our, see this segue. See that segue?
That was professional.
He is now going to be joining us live on stage. This has been a long, long time in the making. Manny is a self-confessed Celtic supporter, and he will be talking all things football, music, fashion, maybe even politics if you let us. And he's joining us in August the 17th. Tickets are absolutely flying, and the ticket link is underneath this video. I'm going to be starstruck that night. Gary Madden, here we go. Love Celtic, love this podcast. Couldn't care less about Rod Stewart, but people are entitled to their own opinion. Gary, absolutely.
Yeah.
Monty, Wrigley's chewing gum and macaroon bars to return. Is this part of Celtic land? Because if you want them to return, Quinny needs to okay it. You're talking about Wrigley's, honestly. It's one of my memories, Quinny. You know, like if you hear a song like unexpectedly, or if you smell a smell, it takes you to a certain moment of your part. Like a certain homemade soup reminds me of my old granny's house in High Valleyfield, right? It's just one of the things. Wrigley's chewing gum will always remind me of the old guy coming home from the football, trying to hide the smell of booze and cigarettes from his breath. A whole packet of Wrigley's chewing gum on the bus home, absolutely. I still chewing it as he staggers in the door. Sorry, old man, if you're watching, but it's true. Alan Robertson, if Brendan does extend his contract before the start of domestic season kickoff? Do we tap up Big Ange and tell him to work as a pundit scout before returning to Paradise? I think the ship sailed, Quinny. I loved Big Ange. Loved him. And I don't know what the overriding view of Big Ange is within the Celtic support. I know a lot of people were unhappy the way he kind of left. At least he did stay to the end of the season, win us a treble. But I think the ship sailed. But in saying that, I mean, I thought the Brendan Rodgers ship has sailed, so anything's possible.
Yeah,
anything's possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. Big Ange, I don't think he's in any hurry to go back to Australia or the Far East Asia at all. Who knows what his next job will be? I've seen somebody in the chat saying he's been linked to an MLS job or the American national team job. I'm not sure which. They just said US. But I think he's, we heard a clip of a lovely podcast after the Tottenham dismissal, and he was talking about the journey to Celtic, the journey to Europe and whatever, and going through with his agent and all that kind of stuff. So I think, I think if he ever got offered it again, he'd probably take it, depending on circumstance and all the rest of it. And yeah, I don't know about bringing him in the back room and the kind of foreshadowing for the next manager beyond Brendan Rodgers. I don't think that kind of thing would probably be on his, on his radar or something he'd be interested in or whatever. But I think he would quite happily come back again in the future if we ever needed him or wanted him. And I'd be surprised if whole scale the fans wouldn't be on board with it, because the stuff that's came out afterwards, he was maybe doing a wee deal with Tottenham for players and whatever when he was still here. It's a bit unsavoury. Don't like to hear it, obviously, but like you say, he did see his time out, and for 100% every day he was here, he was giving his all for it, so really transformed us in a way, because where he found us was really at our lowest. And the players he brought in, the style of play, just injected, you wouldn't even known the 10 in a row thing had happened the year before, after you get 6 months into Ange, when he first showed up here. It just was a real turn of the page kind of situation. I think he did great for us, and I wouldn't hesitate in ever having him back personally.
I always think back to remember the cup final and the look on Peter Lawwell, his face. Remember the look on his face where it was like he was the angriest man in the stadium, because it felt as though they knew what was coming. We had an inkling as to what was coming. Alistair Johnston turned in and said he's off. And I think that the relationship maybe between the higher beaks at Celtic Park and Ange would be more of a concern than any kind of relationship between the fans. Imagine we got him for July's gig at Barazat. Imagine that. Imagine you seen a poster appear next week or something, and it was Big Ange that was on it. That would be interesting. Right, here we go. Irishman in Porto 2002 interviewed Uri Geller at Reading. That is the most incredible introduction to a comment I have ever read. Irishman in Porto interviewed Uri Geller at Reading. Yeah, anything goes in the chat here. I think it was when Tommy was the manager and Packy was his number 2. Imagine there's a picture of Uri Geller bending spoons with Tommy Burns and Pat Warner. It might be out there somewhere. Yeah. Rubber duck. Boggin chewing gum with the Batman stickers. I can almost taste that pink kind of powdery chewing gum you're talking about, rubber duck. Aye. You'd get the packet and you would get a 3 or 4.
Was 1990, I think.
Oh, yeah, man. I couldn't have been safe back there.
I remember that.
Cement. Oh. Deary me, we're talking chewing gum and macaroon bars. Pete McGee, yes, macaroon bar, absolutely. Now, I'm going to get onto these comments that I've seen in relation to this new £22 book that's coming out. Franny McKeown, you can't blame the younger players moving on. They clearly don't have the X factor to make the first team. As Peter Grant says, it's easy to get in the first team, but a lot more difficult to stay there. One thing about Granty, and I'm like a kid in a sweet shop when it comes to talking to Celtic players, ex-Celtic players. I just love finding information out, Chris. I love it. And sometimes we open up behind the scenes, and sometimes they do it on the stage, sometimes they do both. But there's one really interesting Granty said to me, and this shows you how much the game's changed. Back in the day, football clubs had what was called ground staff. You were basically an apprentice footballer, and you were part of the staff in and around the ground, and you did all the chores. So you were cleaning the showers, scrubbing the tiles, Chris, sweeping the terraces, cleaning the boots and all that stuff. Peter Grant had made his debut aged 18 against Rangers at Ibrox under Davy Hay. And he told us the other night, I'd never heard him saying this before, Chris, he said that he had played 100 games in the first team before he left the ground staff.
Yeah, that's right.
He'd established himself in the first team, and he was still cleaning his teammates' football boots. Unbelievable. And you know, it got to the point where they had to say to him, Granty, you need to stop this, mate. You need to go home. After training, go home. Don't stay till 5 or 6. And he was explaining that he just loved it so much, Quinny. He just loved being at Celtic Park. It was his dream. I don't think we'll ever get that again. I think there's a generation of players, and we might be watching them next season. It might be the likes of James A. Forrest, Tierney, and Carl McGregor. That might be the last generation. It seems almost as if that's been completely lost.
I'd be trying everything I possibly could to bring that back or you know, revitalise that view, because something Peter said at the end of his set, which just like that resonated. He said, as far as he's concerned, when people recognise him, he's Peter Grant from Celtic, not Peter Grant from Norwich or any of the other clubs he was at. And he's, you know, he moved about a bit in his career, but he himself associates his career with Celtic because that's his club, and he's a supporter, and he's just like the rest of us. And I know people have said things about Granty, you know, and you know, his friendship with Andy Gorham and things like that. Spend 5 minutes in a man's company, and I don't think there's a bigger Celtic fan out there. I really don't. He is so humble, so down to earth. Again, just someone that has so much affection for the club and the supporters. It means so much to him. He spoke about that. He spoke about attending supporters clubs after games and after, you know, championship wins and seeing what it meant to the supporters, and that for him was the biggest reward. And you're right that there's an element of that where are we going to lose that connection because either the youngsters who are coming through from the academy and have been associated to the club as young guys, they're not necessarily either able or simply, you know, with the greatest respect, just not good enough at this moment in time to break through that ceiling and get to the next level. And I think, you know, we've been fortunate in recent years. We've had the Cal Max, we've had the Kieran Tierneys, we've, you know, had the James Forrests, you know, who are all going to be legends in their own right someday. But who's next? You know, who's next in line to come up and do that? And there doesn't look to be an obvious candidate. Every time we see somebody, you know, whether it be a McCardle, you see glimpses and you think, yeah, that's it. He's going to be the one. You know, let's make sure he gets minutes, and then suddenly, you know, you don't see them again. So you want to see somebody making that breakthrough and really grabbing the opportunity. And it's difficult, right? We're the top club in the country, right? Let's not play this down and say that we could go in there and make that grade. It's tough. You know, what these young guys are having to do is tough. And the coaches are obviously doing whatever they can to give them the opportunity and give them the platform. You know, we're not helped by, you know, Scottish football as an institution and, you know, the lack of reserve football and the lack of, you know, really strong, effective football structure. But you're just hoping to see one of these young guys coming through and going, oh, there he is. He's the next one. There's the next captain. We always say that, don't we? When we see a player coming through who really embodies, you know, a young Scottish guy or, you know, a young homegrown guy coming through, and we always say, there's the next captain. There's the next Calmac or the next Bruni or whatever it is. So you're just hoping for someone like that to come through. And hopefully in this coming season, we'll maybe start to see a few. I certainly think we've seen a couple of potentials, but we just need them to get into that first team and show what they can do.
That's one of the reasons Sean Maloney was brought back to the football club. Without a doubt, Brown Warriors got a suggestion for one of Jim Orr's next plays. He's had Bend It Like Bratback, Bend It Like Bertie, and he thinks it should be Bend It Like Yuri. There you go.
Oh, God, no,
absolutely, let's do it. Pete McGee, what an interesting job that would have been. I used to type royalty statements for the Beatles. Oh, wow. I wonder how many figures were on those statements. One thing I said at the top of the show, we won't labour too much time on this, but I found it quite interesting because it went a wee bit under the radar because of the way that these things are dealt with in the Scottish media, really. David Murray obviously is punting his book. He has been mentioning things that relate to Celtic in relation to, for example, Peter Lawwell. He said held too much influence and positively revelled in Rangers' demise. Did he? I mean, didn't he think it was bad for business? I'm not sure. But anyway, it's everybody else's fault. This is the vibe I'm getting. David Murray, it's everybody else's fault. But the one thing I found really interesting, and I didn't know this, I really did not know this. Obviously, I might have joined the dots, but I'd never heard it confirmed, Quinny, that David Murray, when he bought Rangers with a £6 million loan back in 1988, it was Gavin Masterton that authorised the loan. I didn't know that. I obviously know about the friendship and the connection between the two men later on, obviously in their careers. But I didn't know as far back as 88 when Murray was buying Rangers for £6 million. It was Masterton that authorised the loan. But that in itself is a concern. So £6 million in today's money, it's £17 million. And he explains that, Chris, he just phoned the guy up. He just phones him up. He phoned Gav up, right? Oh, any chance? Any chance? Now, I know that there's a couple of things here. The first thing is that kind of decision-making was what absolutely buried the bank. That's what toppled the bank eventually, you know.
Why you've got so much regulation in now, yeah.
Aye, absolutely. But there was regulations back then. There wasn't what is called a code of conduct. There was risk assessment. It's not like somebody could just go around rubber stamp it. Aye, no bother, give him 17 million, give him 6 million. He's a pal of mine. Aye, I drink with him or whatever else you do with him in your spare time. That was bizarre. That was bizarre. And that was the day that debt was introduced to Scottish football, 1988. And I do understand the other side of it. The other side of that being at the fact 2 years previously, Rangers were taken over by Lawrence Marlborough, 1986. But by 1988, he had reached and breached his overdraft. The Bank of Scotland wanted a safer bet. They seen David Murray as that safer bet. And interestingly enough, they tried to push the deal through in relation to Jerry Weisfeld. You remember Jerry Weisfeld, the takeover? He was the guy that owned Weisfeld's, which became what everyone wants, what every woman wants back in the day. Yeah. Obviously, Fergus McCann came in and did the deal. And one of the things that he did was get rid of the Bank of Scotland. So Fergus was not happy with their practices. But the way I kind of view this, Quinny, is that was day one in terms of nefarious means, right? Because phoning somebody up and saying, oh, by the way, 17 million quid, no problem, authorised over the phone. And, when the interview's done, and for people saying, oh, that was the norm, it wasn't. Scottish football clubs weren't being bought with loaned money for the Bank of Scotland in 1988. It was not the norm. But I had a track record, he says. And money, loans were easier to get back then. You're no joking, mate. But obviously, if you were to scrutinise that, Quinny, even back then, everything was just basically getting overridden for the benefit of one guy and one club.
Yeah, it's definitely a bygone era, isn't it? He also said in that quote, like he talks about phoning up and getting them. He said the paperwork wasn't even signed until 6 months later. Like he got the money in his bank, he went and bought the team, and then 6 months later, the banker like that, oh, you've not even signed the paperwork here, Mr. Murray, so it is just a totally bygone era, as it were, And it is probably, I never really thought about it in that way until you mentioned it there, but it is maybe a bit of a line in the sand moment there for where big finance, big banking kind of gets introduced to the game there, because at that point they were like on, again, it was before my puff, but you can just look at the squads and, the roll of honour and all that kind of stuff, medals and titles won and all the rest of it, that they were on a bit of an ascendancy and we were a bit rocky. And then when you just inject multi-millions on top of it, it's definitely the turn of a page, isn't it? It's the beginning of a new era, and we kind of seen that for them in the 90s, certainly with me growing up, the sort of players they were signing, Gazas and all the rest of it, before they even got on to the Dick Advocat generation. So yeah, it probably is. It's a little bit of, live by the sword, die by the sword as well, because if you're going to be running about playing that game, getting millions of pounds and no signing for it, and, doing special contracts and hiding bits and pieces, and, like I say, live by the sword, die by the sword, they were happy to run their life that way. And then when it all comes crashing around them, it's probably the one thing you've mentioned there is like passing the buck and finger pointing other people. But yeah, if you're going to play that way, then you've got to know you're likely to get burned at some point and take it on the chin when you do.
You would know, it would always be in the back of your mind, it's going to come back to haunt you. It's going to come home to roost, absolutely. And it did. It did come home to roost, we know that. But I found that quite interesting. Treasurer at the time of the Bank of Scotland was Gavin Masterton. His signatures were on the £5 notes back then. Local to myself from Charleston, Gavin Masterton, and obviously got away scot-free, Chris, as many did, with regards to the crisis that engulfed Scottish football in and around the 2012 period as well. But I find it difficult to believe that they are positively revelled in Rangers' demise, because, when you're talking about 5-way agreements and all the rest of it, and, this brand that they wanted to maintain, because they want to ensure that there's that derby, that competition, that fierce rivalry and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a bit of paranoia there and a bit of the blame game, but that's exactly what we would expect.
Paranoia? We know nothing of paranoia. But I would say that Yeah, very few of us know, somebody like Peter Lawwell personally. We don't know what his motivations are. As supporters, did we revel? Yeah, probably a bit, right? We did.
I bet we still are.
But
we always will.
If you're a businessman, if you're someone with a vested interest in Scottish football, and I think we can slightly see the point that if you want the best for Scottish football, you do want the other biggest club at the time, and they're with us as a product. But yeah, I can't imagine, from what I understand about Peter Lawwell, that he would have openly showed any rivalry for Rangers dying. So yeah, I think not for me.
Colin comes in. Yes, I think you are right in saying that we Fergus moved our bank facilities away from the Bank of Scotland. I think we were the only SPL club not to bank with them at that time. We Fergus didn't suffer fools, let's be honest. Love the wee guy. And
I think there's something in here as well that kind of paints into the rivalry between the two clubs as well. Because I don't know, I don't pretend to know too much about Peter Lawwell or what he's like or whatever. Just kind of what everyone says about him, I suppose, and what's reported. But you kind of want a Celtic fan at the front of the line here, making sure they don't get away with stuff, to make sure that they are taken to task on everything that's went wrong with them. So, when I hear that, I don't really have any grudges against it. But one thing that does kind of come to mind is you've probably seen Leon. They're just about to get relegated from League One because they're skint. PSG have just advanced a payment to them for that boy Barcola to try and save them. I think there was something that happened in the 90s around Borussia Dortmund, and Bayern Munich tapped them money, basically keep them square. Yeah. And I think that this is it just highlights again how this derby, this rivalry, because it's not the same thing it used to be called, obviously, is just different, across the whole. It's more than football. It's more than a game. It's a proper, kind of in the blood rivalry, as it were. And I've got no problem if Peter Lawwell was buzzing about taking them over the coals, to be honest with you,
No, I've no issue either. That's really interesting, those examples that you give me there. But in relation to Celtic's history, there was a moment where we did the same with Queen's Park. We bailed them out. I'm talking many, many moons ago. We bailed Queen's Park out. I think it was to the tune of 30 grand at the time, which was a lot of money. But there you go, Quinny. Absolutely, yes, I would have been reveling in it as well. Still am. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Yes, we are doing an audience with Manny. Who are we doing an audience with in July? I'm just throwing it out there. Who would you like to see in July? Because the poster will arrive at some point in the near future, and I will announce it. So thanks everybody for getting involved. Give us a big thumbs up on the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, and join us again tomorrow at 12:30 on A Celtic State of Mind.